Line 11. That is where this entire story lives, and I want you to hold it in your head before anything else, because everything that follows hangs off it. Line 11 of a British school registration form is the emergency contact. It is the line where a parent writes the number of the person the school rings first when a child is ill, when a fire alarm empties a building, when something has gone wrong and nobody has time to work down a list. On 2 of those forms, filed for 2 children in 2 different year groups, line 11 does not carry a parent's number at all. It carries the direct line of a serving duty officer inside the royal household. The school stamped both forms as accepted, and then, 4 days after that stamp went on, the palace published a note saying that nothing had changed. No change to royal status, no return to royal duties, no royal residence. I have read that sentence a dozen times now, and I keep coming back to the same thought. You can publish a boundary. You cannot publish it into the past. By the end of tonight, you will understand why one administrative line on a school form did more to settle where the Sussexes actually stand than any statement issued about them this month, and why the man who eventually drew a rule through that line paid for it in a way he did not expect. Let me introduce you properly to the woman who wrote it, because she's not a villain and she's not a footnote. She's the person this whole thing turns on. Her name is Nadia Renfield, and she is a relocation advisor. That is a real profession, and a quiet one. When a family with complicated logistics moves country, somebody has to convert the complication into ordinary paperwork. Utilities, insurance, medical registration, vehicle records, school places. Renfield's professional reputation is built on a single promise, and it is a promise worth understanding because it explains her decision better than any theory about motive. She makes an unusual family look on paper like every other family. Nothing flagged. Nothing escalated, nothing that makes a clerk pick up the phone and ask a supervisor what to do. Picture her kitchen at 11:30 on a Sunday night. 2 forms side by side, identical apart from the year group, a cup of tea gone cold at her elbow because she has been on it for 3 hours. 22 lines filled in and 1 blank. Line 11 wants a number that will be answered, not a number that exists, a number that will be answered. She has tried the private mobiles that came with the file. One goes to a voicemail box that is full. One is a household number in California that will be asleep when a British school office is open. She has been in this business long enough to know exactly what happens if she leaves it empty. The form comes back, a clerk telephones, a supervisor is asked, somebody in the school office mentions it to somebody else, and within a week it is a story. So she writes the number that she knows will be answered at 3 in the morning by a person rather than a machine, because that is what the duty desk of a great household exists to do. And she goes to bed thinking she has solved a small problem. Now the other side, and this side does not have a kitchen table, it has a corridor. So Alistair Frayne is the private secretary whose signature ended up on the note about status and duties and residence, and the thing you need to understand about a man in that job is what a boundary note actually is. It is not a press release, it is an internal instrument. It is written so that every office in the building answers the same question the same way for the next 2 years. Who books the car? Who is on the list? Who is billed? Who says no? A private secretary does not write those notes because he is cold. He writes them because in an institution that size, an unanswered question becomes a favour, and a favour becomes a precedent, and a precedent becomes something that cannot be undone by anybody currently alive. And there is a habit inside that office that matters here, because it is the reason nobody picked up a telephone. When a family question arrives, whether it is a car, a room, a weekend, or a school, the reflex is not to have the conversation. The reflex is to write the answer down so that the conversation never has to happen again. I have watched that pattern from the outside for years. A request about a residence becomes a paragraph. A question about an invitation becomes a line in a briefing document. It is efficient and it is bloodless, and it works beautifully right up until the day somebody outside the building needs an answer faster than a paragraph can be drafted. On that day, the person who needs the answer stops asking for one and simply writes one. That is precisely what happened here. And underneath both of them, there is a third person who never files anything and never signs anything, and who is the reason this hurts. Some weeks ago, in a conversation that was not minuted, the king asked a question about collection arrangements, not a demand, not a proposal. He asked whether, on an ordinary Wednesday, it might be possible for him to collect his grandchildren from school. He asked it once, he did not raise it again. Everyone who was in the room understood that he had been careful to phrase it as a logistical question rather than a request, because a request would have to be refused and a logistical question can simply not be answered. That is the wound at the centre of this. A father who wants his grandchildren within reach, and an institution that has already written down in a filing system he himself is the head of exactly what he may not have. So the forms go in, both are accepted. Line 11 enters a school database, and that is the moment the boundary moves, though nobody in the palace knows it yet. Because a school database is not a newspaper. It does not care about status, it cares about who to ring. From the instant that stamp goes on, a serving member of the royal household is, in the eyes of a school, the responsible adult for 2 children. That is not a symbol. It is an operational fact with consequences attached to it. It touches collection authority. It touches medical consent in an emergency. It touches who gets notified if there is a security concern on the premises. Renfield solved a small problem and, without meaning to, wrote an institution into a family. 4 days later, the note is published. It is short, it is careful, and it is entirely sincere. It says the arrangement changes nothing. It goes to the officers that need it, and it does not go to the Queen, which is a small detail I keep circling because it tells you the note was understood inside the building as housekeeping rather than as policy. And then the telephone rings. This is the part I would put on screen if I were making this as a film. It is 20 to 3 on a Wednesday afternoon. Gareth Lindsay is at the duty desk. Lindsay is a household duty officer, which means he is the man who answers when a boiler fails at midnight and when a road closure affects a car and when somebody needs a doctor in a hurry. He picks up expecting an internal query. Instead, a school secretary asks him politely whether he will be collecting on Wednesdays or only on Fridays because he is the first name on the list. And does not understand her. He asks her to say it again. She reads it back. He asks her to read line 11 specifically, and she does. And he asks her to read it a second time, and this is the moment the story turns from paperwork into people. Because he has never spoken to that school, he has never seen that form, he did not know those children were registered. His number, his direct line, the one that exists so that a household can respond to an emergency at any hour, has been written onto a family document he never signed and was never shown. And he is now, formally, a person a school believes it can hand a child to. And does not shout. Men in that job do not shout. He asks her to send him a copy, he thanks her, he hangs up, and he walks it upstairs. And that walk is the beginning of everything that follows. Frayn's first response is not an explosion either, and I think that is what makes it interesting. His first response is containment. Close the file, take no calls from the school. Refer any inquiry to the office and answer nothing. He assumes, reasonably, that this is a clerical error that can be quietly unmade, and that the fastest way to unmake it is silence. That assumption is the mistake, and it costs him a week. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, the like button helps this channel keep reaching people who want the fuller picture rather than the headline. Now stay with me, because what happens next is where this stops being about a form at all. Her name is Bernadette Quill, and she has been the admissions registrar at that school for 31 years. She is not a leaker. She's never spoken to a newspaper in her life, and she would find the suggestion insulting. What she is, precisely, is a woman who answers questions that are formally put to her, because that is what the role requires. And when the private secretary's office finally stops trying to close the file, and instead asks the school, in writing, what was on the form when it was accepted, Bernadette Quill does exactly what her job says she should do. She sends back a copy of line 11 and the acceptance stamp, and the stamp carries a date. Here's where the whole thing inverts, and I want to slow down for it. Everyone in that building had assumed a sequence. The palace set a boundary, and then somebody filled in a form that breached it. Careless advisor, clear violation, simple correction. But the stamp says the form was accepted on the Tuesday. The boundary note is dated the Saturday, 4 days later. Which means the palace was not drawing a line at all. It was rubbing out a line that had already been drawn for it by somebody who did not work there on a document nobody in the office had ever seen. Read that sentence again slowly, because it changes the genre of the story. This is not an institution defending a boundary. This is an institution discovering in arrears what it has already agreed to. Renfield does not fold. This is the second thing I admire about her, and it is the thing that turns this from a mistake into a fight. She produces a document of her own. It is an internal relocation worksheet, the kind her firm generates for every move, and there is a tick in the box marked household contact confirmed, And beside the tick, there is a set of initials. She says plainly that she did not invent the arrangement. She says she asked for a name, was given a process instead of a person, and treated the duty desk as the confirmed contact because nobody in the private secretary's office would put an alternative in writing. Nobody in that office recognises the initials. That is the honest position, and it is worth stating without embroidery. It is not that they deny the initials, it is that they cannot identify them. And suddenly the argument is not about intention anymore, it is about handwriting and about the fact that a building with 1,000 internal procedures cannot say who put a mark on a contractor's worksheet. There is one more voice in this, and it belongs to the side that filed. Some weeks before the forms went in, Meghan asked Renfield a question that any mother watching this will recognise instantly. She did not ask about status or protocol or precedent. She asked who would actually answer if something happened at school, and neither parent could be reached in the first 10 minutes. Renfield told her the honest thing, which is that a mobile number is only ever as good as the person carrying it, and that what a school really wants is a desk. Meghan said, in that case, put down whoever answers. I want to be careful with that sentence because it is not an instruction to write a household duty officer onto a school form. It is a mother asking for somebody to pick up. Which desk, which number, which line? That was Renfield's choice, made alone at a kitchen table at 11:30 at night, and she has never once tried to pretend otherwise. Harry acts here too, and I think this beat is the saddest one in the episode. He telephones the duty desk himself, not the office, not an aide, the desk. He wants to hear a person say that the arrangement is fine, and the desk, correctly, following the containment instruction that has been circulating for 6 days, routes him to a switchboard. He gets a recorded greeting and a menu. A man who has spent his life inside that machine calls a number he has known since childhood, and the machine hands him to a menu. Nothing about that was personal. Everything about it was the natural consequence of an instruction to say nothing. That is how institutions injure people. Not with cruelty, with process. And then the scope of it becomes visible because the number is not on one line. It is on the term calendar circulated to families in the field for the responsible contact. It is on the Wednesday collection list, the laminated sheet in the school office that the staff on the gate actually read. And it is on both of them twice, once for each year group. What began as a single line has quietly propagated into 3 documents across 2 year groups, and that is the moment the private secretary's office stops treating this as a clerical error. Delphine Marsh spent 11 years as an administrator inside a royal household before she started writing about them, and she is the person who said the hard thing out loud on the record. Her line was this: "The palace did not set a boundary, it signed one by not reading it. I have been turning that over ever since because it is precise rather than merely cutting." Nobody in that office approved anything. That is exactly the problem. In an institution that runs on the principle that unanswered questions become precedents, an unanswered question was answered by somebody else, in ink, on a school database, and the institution found out from a secretary asking about a Wednesday. She added one more thing that I have not been able to shake. In her experience, she said, the household almost never loses an argument about access. What it loses again and again is the argument about who wrote the first draft. Which brings us to the corridor. Frayne does not do this in his office, and I do not think that is an accident. He does it in the equerries corridor, standing at the window with 3 documents held up to the light so that 4 other people can see what he is looking at. The accepted form, the acceptance stamp, the boundary note. He reads line 11 aloud, then he reads the date on the stamp, then he reads the date on his own note, and he says the 2 dates again in order so that nobody in that corridor can ever claim afterwards that they did not understand the sequence. Renfield is there and she argues, and she nearly wins the room. She says an emergency contact is housekeeping, not constitutional theory. She says every family in Britain writes down the adult who reliably answers, and that a school does not care about status, it cares about who picks up. She says the alternative was a blank line, and a blank line becomes a phone call, and a phone call becomes a story, and that avoiding that story is precisely what she was paid to do. And here is the part I want to be fair about, because it is the strongest thing anybody says in this entire affair. She is right about all of it. If the office had given her a name, she would have written the name. Frayne's answer is 4 words, and it ends the argument. His office was never asked. Not asked and refused, not asked and delayed, never asked. She had gone to the household through her firm's own channel, ticked her own box, and treated a process as a person. Both things are true at once and neither rescues the other. Then he asks for a pen. He draws a single rule through the duty officer's number. He writes the name of his own office above it, he initials it and dates it, and he sends it back to the school with a covering letter, transferring school liaison to the private secretary's office, effective immediately. From that afternoon, the school does not contact the family's advisor about anything. It contacts the palace. Every collection change, every medical form, every alteration to the term calendar goes through one desk. And Renfield is told, while she is still holding her worksheet, that the relocation account is closed. Not paused, not reassigned. Closed. She loses the client and she loses something harder to replace, which is the professional claim she built her firm on, that she can make a complicated family look ordinary on paper. And you can watch the transfer working on the first Wednesday after it. The laminated sheet in the school office has been reprinted. The number on it now belongs to a switchboard with a reference code beside it, and the staff on the gate have been told that any change to collection is confirmed by that office rather than by a parent at the railings. A change that would once have been a sentence said at the gate now takes an email and a code. Nothing about that is cruel. All of it is procedure. It is also unmistakably an institution standing between a family and a school gate, which is the exact arrangement the published note promised would not exist. Now let me put the money beside it for a moment, because this is where the transfer stops being symbolic. Once a household desk is the school's contact of record, term time cover is not a favour anybody can withdraw. It is an operational obligation with a rota attached, and rotas cost money. Somebody has to be reachable on Wednesdays. Somebody has to be briefed on collection. Somebody has to answer at 3 in the morning. The published note said there would be no institutional cover. The corrected form created a version of it anyway, ran it through the private secretary's office and put it on an internal budget line. Both things can be true at once. The palace defended the boundary and funded the exception in the same afternoon. And there is one more cost, and it lands on the man nobody was arguing about. The corrected form goes to the King's study, because a document of that kind always does. A single sheet on the blotter. He reads it in the way he reads everything, slowly, with a pencil in his hand that he does not use. He sees the ruled line. He sees the number that was written there by a stranger. He sees another man's office written above it in another man's hand. And he understands, without anybody explaining it, that the sentence protecting the institution he leads is the same sentence that keeps his grandchildren at the far end of a corridor of procedure. He does not ask for it to be changed back. He puts the paper down and moves on to the next thing in the box, which is what that job has always required. I want to be fair before we finish, because there is a generous reading here and it deserves its full weight. Frayne did the correct thing. An institution that discovers it has been written into a family's arrangements by a contractor without approval must correct it, and correcting it quickly is kinder than letting it harden. Transferring liaison to his own office was not petty. It was the only way to make sure that the next form and the one after that is completed by someone who was actually authorised to complete it. He protected 2 children from an arrangement built on a tick in a box. And the uncomfortable fact sits right beside that. The arrangement worked. For 4 days, and then for the days it took to unpick, there was a number on a school list that would have been answered by a person at any hour of any night. Nobody planned it, nobody approved it, and it was better than what replaced it. What replaced it is a desk, a rota, and a letter, and a father who now has to ask a private secretary's office for a Wednesday. So here is where I land. Line 11 started this episode as an oddity, one strange row on a piece of school stationery. It ends it as a ruled through line with another office written above the number. And that little correction says more plainly than any statement could that the boundary between that family and that institution was never really set by anybody's announcement. It was set by whoever held the pen when the form was in front of them. And the palace spent a week catching up with a decision it had already made without knowing. So which reading do you land on? Did the palace defend a boundary it had unknowingly already agreed to?